Who doesn't love a comeback story?
Sometimes it was just an artist who got a second wind years later. Some just completely redefined their career.
Welcome to Get to the Hook. I'm your co-host, Charles Latibeaudiere.
I'm Eric Colley.
All right, and we are going to get to the hook. And this week we're going to the top of the charts because what's more timely in music than who's number one? And this week we have Mr. Hozier to thank.
Very surprising number one. It's a guy who, to most people, was a one-hit wonder a decade ago.
A great hit, though.
Yeah, Take Me to Church, peaked at number 2, came out in 2014. And so here's a little bit of his new song, Too Sweet, which is currently number 1.
I'll take my whiskey and leave my coffee back in my bed at 3. You're too sweet for me. You're too sweet for me.
I don't think even a few months ago anybody would have predicted that Hozier would have a number 1 hit in 2024.
Like, what? He's still around?
Yeah. It is a great comeback. We are going to look at some of the greatest comebacks in music history.
Who doesn't love a comeback story?
Sometimes it was just an artist who got a second wind years later. Some just completely redefined their career, where you see there's this era and that era, and there's a heavy dividing line.
Exactly. There's a very clear line that you can tell.
Some are very unexpected, like Hozier, but if you look at the signs, Hozier's self-titled album from 2014, the one with Take Me to Church, has been on the Billboard 200 album chart for over 300 weeks now.
Really?
So his fans that he got 10 years ago, they've stayed, and newer fans have discovered him. He had a very successful tour last year. He's been putting out albums that did well. It's one of those times where you just need the right song at the right moment, and he got it.
Yeah.
And now he's number 1.
Gotta love it. So let's start down the comeback trail.
Yeah.
And what I love about this is that really a lot of these artists, I think for us, it feels, because a lot of this happened in our, how do they say, in our youth.
Yeah. Like 10 years ago when we were very young.
Very impactful years in our life. And I think a big part of this, a number of these have to do with MTV.
Very much so. There were a lot in the 80s.
And then I think the new MTV, of course, would be like social media. But so I think years from now, we're going to see a bunch of comebacks because of social media.
Yeah.
But in our youth, we saw it because of MTV. Well, but even before MTV, there was a comeback that certainly was driven by just regular TV.
Right. And it's called The Comeback Special.
Right. I mean, when you put it in the title Elvis, then we're going to know. It's,
Elvis, one of the greatest, biggest, most successful artists, iconic artists of all time, needed a comeback.
Yeah.
And what's wild, I never realized this until a few years ago, when he had the comeback special, he was 33. He was, which just tells you how much he had accomplished by 30. But yes, he was he's only 42 when he died. Elvis, obviously, when you think of Elvis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Just if he pops in your head, what do you visualize?
I visualize him in a leather suit, playing Jailhouse Rock.
Oh, that's the first thing, but from the comeback special.
Yeah.
Or I think people think of the jumpsuits and the sunglasses and
I
all that.
Intentionally try to. I mean,
try not
talking
to.
About Vegas Elvis.
Yeah, but that you don't get Vegas Elvis without the '68 comeback special. Right. So late '50s, early young Elvis. When you have Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock and Don't Be Cruel, that Elvis. People kind of forget he dropped off in the early '60s. It was a combination of things. One, he went in the military for a while, and that sort of derailed him. His manager, Colonel Tom Parker, insisted he get into movies, and all of his music became soundtracks to these movies, which for the most part, really cheap, lightweight comedies. They were not great movies. Elvis did not love making them. And then also you had the Beatles hit, and once that happened, music changed so drastically. He just seemed like yesterday's hero.
Right.
From 1964 when the Beatles hit until 1969, Elvis only had one top 10 hit. It was Crying in the Chapel in '65. Oh. So by the time this comeback special happened in '68, it was aired on NBC. Colonel Parker just envisioned this as a Christmas special with the Singer Sewing Machine Company. And it was going to be cheesy and hokey and Elvis dressed up in Christmas sweaters singing Silent Night or whatever.
God, that would have been a disaster.
And Elvis was like, absolutely.
Well, actually, it probably would have.
It would have been okay,
audience, but
I don't know that we would talk about Elvis as much as we do had the special not become what he wanted it to be, which was to be younger and more relevant. And 1968, you have the Robert Kennedy assassination, the Martin Luther King assassination, which really particularly hit Elvis because Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis.
Right.
which is Elvis's
Elvis's town.
town.
Right.
That's where Graceland is. And so all this was happening, and he's like, I don't want to sell sewing machines in a Santa costume.
Yeah.
And so he did the leather outfit. And the first thing you got to do for a comeback, when you are a beloved artist that's dropped off, you got to remind people why they liked you in the first place.
That's right. And you gotta give him the hits.
Yeah, he had been making those hokey movies like Clam Bake and Kissin' Cousins, and people's like, Elvis is a joke. And then he shows up in that leather outfit singing Jailhouse Rock, and you're like, oh, that's right.
Yep, that's the guy.
Elvis is the guy.
Right.
He did that, and not just reminding people why they liked him in the past, reminded them why they should still like him. So he came out with this song. It was a new song he did for the special, kind of related to what was going on socially, culturally. This is If I Can Dream.
But as long as a man has the strength to dream, he can redeem his soul and fly.
I mean, that is such an impassioned vocal.
Powerful.
It was an Elvis nobody had heard in a very long time.
Yeah.
And it launched this whole new second half of his career. I mean, yeah, you think of the jumpsuits and the glasses and Thank You Very Much and Vegas. But the hits he had after the comeback special, you have
big,
like my favorite Elvis songs, In the Ghetto, Burning Love, Kentucky Rain, Suspicious Minds, his final #1 hit.
Yep.
I mean, that's his best song to me. But
Suspicious Minds.
I have a soft. My dad loved that song, so I've got a soft spot for it.
Yeah. It's,
But yeah, that sort of defined who Elvis was to every generation that came after. I mean, there's there's 50s rock and roll Elvis, but most people think of Elvis impersonators in Vegas. And, when Joe Jonas and Sophie Turner got married, it was an Elvis impersonator that did the ceremony.
Right. And Vegas Elvis, even though forget about the sad visuals of
There's
late,
the ending of it was very sad, yes.
but the fact that he had those shows in Vegas is because of this special. Like that's what renewed the interest in him. That's what made Vegas go, all right, this guy, we want him to have a show here, have a residency here. And you're right, all those big hits, it's pretty amazing to have as your last #1 such a great song as Suspicious Minds. And now that I'm thinking about it, because you named those late hits, that's what I grew up. I've said many times on our shows and everything that I grew up listening. My mom was an Elvis fanatic, and so I would hear those songs on weekends. She would just have the record player going.
Right.
She had them stacked. So it'd be like three Elvis LPs stacked, and they would, and they would drop down, and then when that one was done, the next one dropped down.
Yeah.
And those were the songs that I heard. So I heard all that late.
Same thing.
Elvis, yeah.
My dad loved Elvis, but he never really listened to the 50s stuff very much. It was Aloha from Hawaii and Suspicious Minds and American Trilogy and all those 70s things. And so to me, that was Elvis.
Right.
But so that was a career rejuvenating and redefining moment for him. Some of Elvis's 50s teen pop crooner idol contemporaries also had some big comebacks in the 70s. Paul Anka and Neil Sedaka, two teen artists who were big in the 50s, had some #1 hits. Both were very big songwriters, which also helped them survive. But by the early 60s, they were both has-beens, kind of. That's a harsh word, but they couldn't get a hit. They couldn't get a hit. Then in the mid-70s, they both just had these comebacks at the same time. In 74, Paul Anka hits with You're Having My Baby, which it was controversial even at the time because it was sort of, and it wasn't meant to be misogynistic, but it was saying like this woman showed how much she loved him by having his baby.
Right.
Definitely not a song that's aged well.
But people didn't, it hasn't aged well. But at the time,
it was a little controversial at the time. This was the middle of the women's lib movement and the ERA and all that kind of stuff. Also, Neil Sedaka, 1975 was the biggest year of his entire career.
Sedaka is back.
Sedaka is back. He wrote the biggest hit of 1975, Love Will Keep Us Together by Captain and Tennille. And at the end of that song, if you listen,
she says,
as Tony Tennille is just kind of vamping the la 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 la's, Sedaka is back. She sneaks that in right before the fade out. He had hit #1 that year with Laughter in the Rain. And then at the end of 75, spent 3 weeks on top with this song, Bad Blood, and listen to the backing vocalist. You recognize that voice?
Well, I was before you played it, I was like, it's probably Michael McDonald, but,
no.
It's not Michael McDonald in this case.
It is his record label boss, the person he met at a party randomly that engineered the entire comeback in the 70s. Neil Sedaka signed to Rocket Records in the mid-70s, which was a vanity label owned by Elton John. And remember, this is mid-70s Elton John when he is set like a third of all record sales in the world.
Right.
So
He
Elton's
decided to
like,
sing backup on.
yeah. So that's Elton John singing backup on Bad Blood. Spent 3 weeks at #1, and so and not too coincidentally, after two more albums, Neil left his record label, which there actually was some bad blood there for a little bit between them. They got over it, but he stopped having hits again after that. So, you know, you hitch your wagon to the biggest star in the world,
But you made a comeback almost 20 years after your heyday.
right? And
You take that and you run.
you know, they're in their 80s now, but Paul Anka and Neil Sedaka both still kicking, still touring.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's mostly because of those 70s comebacks. If they had only ever had their 50s hits, I don't know they'd still be touring. But, you know, and then Paul Anka worked with Michael Jackson in the 80s, still very
working,
relevant in the music industry. Unfortunately, caused us to have Harvey singing My Way.
It's the only black mark on Paul Anka's career was that he invited Harvey into a studio.
Let's play a clip of that. No, I'm kidding.
No,
we will
no,
never play a clip of that. I'm
no.
joking. Another big 60s act that had a weird comeback, and we're hitting the 80s now. And I think partly a lot of these bands we're going to see were in the 80s. I think it's because that's when boomers started getting nostalgic.
Yep.
They started hitting like 30s and 40s. And so all the artists they loved, like, you know.
That happens for every generation, by the way.
Yeah, but we don't usually bring all our artists. Like, the people I loved in the 90s aren't huge now. But like in the 80s, you remember Paul McCartney was having hits, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, like all the 60s people
Basically,
were just...
everybody who sang on We Are the World.
Yeah, they were all still having big pop hits. One of the weird outliers was the Monkees.
Yeah.
And I was the perfect age that I loved the Monkees.
I never really knew I knew of the Monkees, and I knew like their big hits.
Yeah.
And besides that, I knew Davy Jones was on a Brady Bunch episode.
Yeah, that's
right. That's what I knew of the Monkees.
Well, yeah, I didn't know them at all when I was a little kid. And then in '86, it was the 20th anniversary of their TV show. And MTV was like, let's get the rights to show that because, one, it's cheap content, and MTV loves cheap content. So they started rerunning the Monkees, and like kids my age just loved it. We loved it the same way kids did in the 60s. And, you know, you're discovering Daydream Believer and Last Train to Clarksville and I'm a Believer and all these great songs. And then the Monkees took advantage of this. 3 of the 4 of them got back together. Mike Nesmith wasn't involved in this one. They released a new song, and it made the top 20 in 1986. This was the Monkees. That was then. This is now.
That was then. That was then. This is now.
Kind of hokey, very dated production.
Oh my gosh!
But it just shows how big their revival was. That was a hit.
It shows how many people were watching MTV for that song to have been the top 20 hit.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think the bigger thing...
No offense to the Monkees.
No, and the Monkees, they tried to do another new album in '87, didn't do as well, and that was kind of the end of that. But I think the bigger thing that comeback did for them was that it caused a younger generation to reevaluate who the Monkees were. Because to this day, boomer critics, the Monkees have never been nominated for the Rock Hall of Fame because they were a fake band put together for TV.
To play off of Beatlemania.
I think younger people reevaluated because, one, part of the reason that show ended after 2 years was because the members of the Monkees revolted against the record label. They're like, we want to play our own instruments. We want to write all of our own songs. We don't want, we're not just TV stars.
Right.
That's a real punk rock attitude.
Yeah.
They were the biggest band in the world. Literally, 1967, they had 4 #1 albums that year, spent 29 weeks on top. More of the Monkees sold more copies than Sgt. Pepper that year. They
Get
eclipsed.
Out of here. All right, no.
No, it is true.
Eric, that's not true.
The Monkees eclipsed the
telling me
Beatles
that
and the Stones in 1967 for sales. They sold more. That was the biggest selling album. They were the biggest selling bands.
I want to look this up. I mean,
it is true.
It's not often I question your facts, Eric.
This is true.
But
the Monkees were bigger than the Beatles in 1967. And then a year later, it was
that's why
basically
the Beatles
over.
broke up. They're like, hey, if the
Monkees have beat us, what are we doing? But clearly they had, the songs were there. Those are great songs.
Yeah.
And that they fought to get independence to be artists, even though it ended their commercial career.
Right.
I respect that.
You know what? Props to the Monkees. All right.
It's like, remember in the 90s, people rediscovered the Carpenters?
Yes.
Because the Carpenters in the 70s had been kind of a joke. And then all these alt-rock bands were like, no, actually, Karen Carpenter's amazing.
Yeah.
And now they're cool. And it kind of happened with the Monkees a little bit.
All right. You know what?
I say put them in the Rock Hall of Fame, but that's just me.
Listen, this is going to be my takeaway from this week is that the Monkees actually deserve some respect.
I think so. Put some respect on their name.
All right.
Yeah, but we said MTV in the 80s was so good for so many older acts.
It really was. I mean,
because
I didn't have it for the first few years of it. Yeah, I couldn't get it.
Oh, I'm so sorry
I
for
had to
you.
go over to a friend's house and be like, "Oh, you guys have MTV?" Yes, but it was quite a revelation when we did get MTV in my house, and there were a lot of older bands from the '70s that had totally fallen off and that suddenly discovered, hey, we're flashy enough, so let's do
Yeah.
some music.
We look all right. Yeah, all the unattractive bands went away, but the ones who could pull some visual style. And oddly, one of the biggest to benefit from this, and I think a lot of people nowadays don't even realize this band needed a comeback, was Aerosmith. They were really
Yeah.
big in the 70s, you know, Dream On, Sweet Emotion, all these great songs. And then they had, you know, addiction issues, personality clashes, members quit the band, came back, left.
Yep.
They fell apart a bit towards the end of the 70s. And then by the mid 80s, they were getting clean. They were trying to get their act back together and make a comeback, which was, you know, hard to do because hair metal was taking over at that point.
Right.
So how does Aerosmith compete with Motley Crue and Bon Jovi with rap?
Exactly. You get in bed with rap,
which is
which
so
is
bizarre.
exploding at that point. And
Yeah, the very first top 10 rap song ever was Run DMC's Walk This Way, which was a sample/remake of Aerosmith's 70s song. And they got Steven Tyler and Joe Perry to come back and re-sing and replay their
actually
parts.
and be in the music video.
And
with
be in the
them.
video.
Yeah.
And, I mean,
A
everybody...
very simple but brilliant music video.
Very simple, where they literally knock a wall down
Yeah.
and then perform together at the end. I remember seeing that as a kid being like, who are these old dudes with Run DMC? I don't know who they are.
I mean, I'd heard the name Aerosmith, but honestly, that song is what sort of opened me up to. I don't even know if I would have known what Joe Perry or Steven Tyler looked like.
No, just long-haired 70s dudes.
Yeah.
But I remember seeing them in the video, and this was the song.
She told me to walk this way, go this way, walk this way, go this way. She told me to walk this way.
And to Aerosmith's credit, they never tried to dabble in rap again.
Right.
Yeah, they
They're
could have
like,
tried
"All right,
to...
that worked.
Because they were
Keep 'em-
smarter. I think if they had tried to do another rap song or sample something with the Fat Boys or whoever, it would have been a blip. But they came out with the album Permanent Vacation, which had Ragdoll, Dude Looks Like a Lady, Angel. Then they had the album Pump with Janie's Got a Gun and Love in an Elevator. And then they were off and running. I mean, all through the 90s, Aerosmith were neck and neck with, you know, Pearl Jam and Nirvana and every other rock band of that era. And they had hits up until 2001. Jaded was a top 10 hit. So going MTV was a very good move for Aerosmith.
And allowed them to continue touring up until just last year.
They're on their farewell tour, yeah. So, and now they're like these legends. I think had that comeback not happened, they still would have been successful, but they would have been like
Not in the numbers.
Thin Lizzy or Foghat or those other 70s bands that were big and just kind of never had a moment again after that. Other 70s bands that took advantage of MTV, they found Makeup and Hairspray. Heart,
Yeah.
Ann and Nancy Wilson, their band, big in the 70s, Barracuda, Magic Man, Crazy on You. By the early 80s, they were running out of steam. They had 2 albums that didn't do very much, and then they got slick producers,
They added some synthesizers.
got outside songwriters, These Dreams, Alone,
Teased up
Never,
their
What
hair.
About Love? Yeah, they
Teased up
had
the hair, and they were made for
those tight, silky Paisley outfits they used to wear, like very like Prince backup dancers. Jefferson Airplane / Jefferson Starship
which
/ Starship.
you want to talk about a band that started as one thing and ended as another, like
Unrecognizable.
completely unrecognizable except for a couple of voices.
Right, and even that, some of the people like left and some
Yeah.
came back. But yeah, they were the hippie era '60s band, White Rabbit, Somebody to Love, like huge hits.
Yeah.
And then dropped off when the '70s hit. Then became more of a folk rock kind of '70s band and had Miracles and Runaway and Count on Me. Faded again by the '80s, and then they glossed it up.
Reborn again.
And We Built This City. Some people call that the worst song of all time. I absolutely don't think so. I love that dumb song. But one of the things people criticized was it was supposed to be like an anti-capitalism record. And there's a part where they're talking about corporations being faceless and soulless. And they
Who
say,
counts the money?
and they go, yeah, who cares? They're always changing corporation names. That's rich coming from Jefferson Airplane /
Right,
Jefferson Starship
exactly.
/ Starship. But they got
Make
three.
up your mind. What are you?
But they had 3 number 1 hits in 2 years in the '80s.
Yeah,
It was very good for them.
indeed.
The chameleon of rock and roll, David Bowie.
Yes, I mean, because Bowie, again, this is where we talk about you had an era of David Bowie in the late 60s, 70s. That was this eclectic but very successful artist, right? And Ziggy Stardust and all that. And then in the the late 70s, early 80s. He's not hitting. I don't know. I can't speak to what he did in Europe, but I know in
it's
the
very.
US,
They call it
he was not
the
hitting.
Berlin trilogy. It was the albums he made in the late 70s, up in the early 80s. Very critically respected, regarded as some of his greatest albums, but they just weren't producing hits.
Yeah, wasn't hitting here.
And Bowie was never concerned with being a huge pop star as an overriding concern. Sometimes he played pop star because that's just what he felt like. But hits was not always like his main concern. Right. But everybody likes to get a hit.
Yeah.
When you're an artist, you want people to hear your music.
And Bowie came up with a great one. He decided to work with Nile Rodgers from Chic, and the Let's Dance in 1983. I heard this song this weekend, and it just is so good. But went to #1.
Yeah, his first #1 since Fame in 1975.
And
fun fact, you know who played guitar on Let's Dance?
I do. Stevie Ray Vaughan played on the whole album.
So David Bowie, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Nile
Rodgers. How are you not going to hit?
Yeah, and then they had China Girl, Modern Love. And David Bowie was off and running again.
Yeah, and stayed again. Another guy who, and I wonder. I don't know this, but if part of the reason he wanted to have a hit in the early 80s, because at that point, 83, MTV is around, and he's watching this and he's like, wait a second, that's me. I'm the original visuals guy.
Yeah.
Get me a hit so I can be on this thing, MTV. And it worked.
And he understood how to use that in a way I think a lot of his 70s contemporaries couldn't ever figure out.
Right.
But he was always a visual guy and always, the chameleon of rock, they call him, because he was always changing.
Miss him. R.I.P.
Oh, yeah. He was so great. Let's talk about the queen of comebacks.
It's hard to think of as Cher as a comeback now because she's just ubiquitous.
She's Cher.
She's just always there.
But
there was a period she wasn't.
No, multiple times. If you look at the peaks and valleys of her career, and I think this is interesting too. I think it's a generational thing, and this speaks to how she kept herself relevant and iconic to multiple generations. When you think of Cher, what is the Cher song you think of? What is the one that you're like, yeah, that's the Cher song?
Unfortunately, Do You Believe in Love pops in my head.
Really?
Yeah.
So you're a millennial?
I guess so. It's just this there.
I think in general, like if you ask any boomer,
Turn Back Time.
See, that's the Gen X one.
Yeah.
For boomers, it's definitely I Got You, Babe, with Sonny and Cher. Like that is such an iconic song.
But because she has so many, depending on who you ask, everyone will have a song.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, even
but
still.
It's going to be different.
I mean, her most recent charted song was This Past Christmas. She did a song called DJ Play a Christmas song that made the Hot 100. But yeah, so she and Sonny got big in the 60s. Then she had her solo career in the early 70s, firing off #1 hits. They have their variety show. Then they get divorced. The variety show ends. By 74, the hits had started to dry up.
Right.
5 years later, her first comeback, she does a song called Take Me Home, goes top 10, because Cher jumped headfirst into disco, which makes sense. That's totally her brand. But then sadly, disco dies and Cher goes with it.
Right.
She's struggling in the 80s. She starts an album, like a self-titled album in the late 80s, 87, a song called I Found Someone. Goes to #10. But the other more important thing is through the 80s, as her recording career was struggling, she got more into acting.
Right.
Had the movie Mask. And then a month after I Found Someone hit #10, she wins the Oscar for Best Actress for Moonstruck and had been nominated while that song was moving up the charts. So she sort of took the momentum of her movie career, reignited her recording career.
Get back into recording studio and...
Yeah, and so she has that, and We All Sleep Alone was a hit from that record. And then 2 years later, 89, she comes back with this song, and it cements her to a generation.
Is this the song for you?
This is the song for me. I also believe.
Yeah.
I mean, but yeah, so yeah, she had that. She's big in the late 80s, early 90s, hits dry up again, comes back in 98, Believe, tops the charts all around the world, becomes her biggest hit ever. It's hard not to think of Do You Believe in Life After Love? That is such a...
It's just...
a Cher song. Like,
right.
And it's just crazy that she had these iconic moments in multiple decades and is still around.
Again. Yeah.
She's just Cher at this point. You look at it all as just one big thing.
Still on her farewell tour, right?
She's been on her farewell tour since, what, 1990, I think?
This is the one. I'm telling you, this is the one. I think her and the Rolling Stones are in a battle for who's going to do the last tour.
Well, yeah, Kiss is throwing their hat in the ring. They're done for now.
Yeah, they say they're
so Cher, like David Bowie and Cher, even when the hits weren't there, they were still famous.
Right.
This guy, he was famous to music fans, but by the end of the 90s, in the middle of the Britney, Backstreet, boy band boom, Ricky Martin and the Latin pop explosion, Carlos Santana was not a top-of-mind guy.
Does not fit.
Nobody-
Which one doesn't fit in
Yeah.
all those names you just said? How in the world is Carlos Santana in the middle of the mix?
It is so weird. You know, in the 60s, in the Woodstock era, he comes out with Oye Como Va and Black Magic Woman and all these classic songs.
And he was purely of that era. That was it.
Yeah, he
Like,
had, every once in a while he'd get a random top 40 hit up until like the early 80s. But nobody remembered. His moment was the late 60s, early 70s.
Right.
Abraxas, that album, like he was just so huge. And then through the 90s, he had lost his record label. He was yesterday's hero for sure.
Yeah.
He and Clive Davis were buddies. Clive Davis was the head of Arista Records, the guy who discovered Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
Because back in the 60s, Clive had discovered Santana. And so Carlos is like, Clive, I need a hit. Like, I want to throw my name back out there again. And this is the most deliberate of these comebacks because Santana's like, I want to hit. I want to appeal to younger people. I want to sell records again.
And so they pair him up with a bunch of
Lauryn Hill,
contemporary
Dave
artists.
Matthews, and the most famous, this song has never gone away in almost 25 years, Smooth.
You got the kind of loving that can be so smooth, yeah. Give me your heart and make it real, or else forget about it.
Do you think it bothers Rob Thomas that his biggest hit is actually Santana? Come on.
No, because he
I'm
got
sorry.
feature credit. I think people
He got
think of
feature
that
credit,
as
But I like when I think of Rob Thomas, I think of that song before I think of any songs
by Matchbox 20.
at Matchbox 20.
Well, probably not, because I just learned this not too long ago. Rob Thomas wrote that song for a different artist than Santana, and he never meant for himself to sing it.
Right.
Do you know who he wrote that for?
No.
And in his mind, when he sings it, he's doing his impression of that person. I don't hear that, but George Michael.
Okay, now wait.
He thought like there was a more soulful song that
it
would
was a
work
bit
with
more
George
soulful,
Michael.
Right. It wouldn't be arranged probably the same way with Santana.
Of course, yeah,
playing
you take all the
guitar.
Latin influence out of it probably.
Right.
But yeah, Rob
Huh.
Thomas thought of George Michael
Wow.
singing that. And it would have been very interesting had George Michael sung that, but he did not.
Right.
Rob
it's
Thomas
George
did.
Michael.
It worked out for him. It worked out for Santana. That was number one for 12 weeks in 99 into 2000.
Right.
Follow-up single Maria Maria, number one for 10 weeks. The album has sold 30 million copies worldwide. Won the Grammy.
That was the year like he won every Grammy.
Every Grammy.
Right.
And even he had a couple hits from his next couple albums. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
a one-off. Santana had songs like Little Bit of Love with Michelle Branch and
Yep.
Why Don't You and I with Chad Kruger. Sorry, it's Kruger from
Wait,
Nickelback.
it is?
It's pronounced Chad Kruger.
It's Chad Kruger?
I saw an interview and he told
I'm
people
learning a lot
we'd
today.
all been pronouncing his name wrong for decades. It is Chad
I mean,
Kruger.
not that I say it that often.
It's because he's Canadian. I saw an interview and he said that when they first came to America, Nickelback, interviewers would introduce him as Chad Kroger, and because he's polite Canadian, he never corrected them. And so we all just learned it wrong. Yeah, Santana had commercially maybe the biggest comeback ever. To go from someone who'd not had a huge hit or a top 10 hit in almost 30 years to dominating.
Well, like before
music.
that album, the only Santana hit I can think of is Winning. And that was
Winning
like
was like
top
1980.
30 or
Yeah, he had a song called Hold On in like 82, I think. There were little bits
Yeah.
here and there. And because it's hard to remember because Santana's a guitar player, it was always different vocalists.
Yeah.
So even if you knew the song, you might not know it's a Santana song. This one is a comeback depending on where you live. In America, this was a huge comeback.
Right.
In Britain, it was not at all. Kylie Minogue,
Yeah.
2002, out of nowhere, she lands this massive hit. This song, Can't Get You Out of Head, and I warn you, you're not going to be able to get it out of your head if you hear this. I tried to be nice, not putting the la la la.
Yeah, oh, you
la,
did. Thank
la,
you.
La la la. So that was a top 10 hit in 2002. Kylie Minogue had last hit the top 10 in the U.S. in 1988 with The Locomotion when she was a teen singer, when she was a contemporary of Tiffany and Debbie Gibson.
Right.
And then she dropped off, and nobody in America had heard about her. And
she still had
14 years.
a very good career in the UK.
In the
Australia.
UK, because in the UK, she had in her entire career, she's had 35 top 10 hits, 7 number one singles. She is Madonna in Britain.
Wow.
Like that is how huge she is. Like Taylor Swift levels of fame. In America, we were like, who? Oh, the Locomotion girl?
Yeah.
But so Can't Get You Out of My Head comes back and makes her, she had a couple more hits in the US after that, but stayed relevant as a name. Her song Padum Padum last year was a number one dance hit. Not a huge chart hit, but you don't have to be a chart hit to be a hit.
And she's still
A lot of streams.
Invited to invent. There was something at the YouTube theater here
Yeah.
in LA like a month ago, and they were like, "Oh, Kylie Minogue was there," and I was like, "Kylie Minogue."
She's still famous because even if you don't remember the locomotion or if you're not British, you still remember Can't Get You Out of My Head and all the dance hits she's had. Also, fun fact about Can't Get You Out of My Head, it was a double comeback. For Kylie Minogue, certainly, there was a dance pop singer in the early 90s named Kathy Dennis. Do you remember her?
I remember Kathy Dennis.
She did Touch Me All Night
Touch
Long,
Me
Too Many Walls,
All Night Long.
Just Another Dream.
Mhm.
When her pop star career faded, she went into songwriting.
Oh.
And became a huge star. Some of the songs that she's written, Can't Get You Out of My Head, she co-wrote that. I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry.
Really?
Toxic by Britney Spears.
Wow.
So, yeah.
All right, Kathy Dennis.
So it was
All right.
it was a comeback for Kylie and Kathy.
All right, that's a subtitle comeback.
Right. It's like, I'm going to be a songwriter now and write some of the biggest hits of the 2000s.
Gotta love that.
Rock bands, they can sometimes fade away and try and change their image, and they make bad ideas by doing it. Sometimes they did disco records. Sometimes they went adult contemporary. Green Day went political, and that could have been a recipe for disaster, but it saved their career.
Maybe at the right time.
The perfect time.
Yeah.
1994, their album Dookie comes out, sells over 10 million copies. It's one of the defining albums of the 90s, put pop punk back on the map. Actually, in the mainstream, for the first time it was on the map, because it's not like the Sex Pistols and the Ramones were having huge hits.
Right.
And that's how you got Blink-182 and Sum 41 and all those bands. So Green Day had seen diminishing returns for a decade. Other than the blip of Good Riddance, Time of Your Life in '98, remember that? The song played at every graduation ceremony.
I hated that song.
Still, it's hard to listen to because I'm so tired of hearing it. I like the song, but it got played
I
out.
didn't even like it.
But other than that one hit, like Green Day, like I said, Dookie sold 10 million. Then their next couple albums, Nimrod, Insomniac, Warning, their 2000 album sold 500,000 copies. So within 6 years, they went from 10 million to 500,000.
Right.
And it was not looking
500,000
good.
sounds impressive for
Anybody else.
A lot of people, but for them, when you've been at that level, right.
And again, this was 2000 when you're seeing all the boy band pop and rap rock and metal and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Green Day just seemed like you were a big blip on the map, but you were a blip.
Right.
They took 4 years until their next album, and they went political. They raged against the George Bush administration, and they came out with American Idiot.
Don't wanna be an American idiot. Don't want a nation under the new media.
That album sold 6 million copies. Actually became their first #1 album. They'd never gotten past number 2 before. They made a musical out of that album, and it redefined Green Day's persona. I think the only reason they got in the Rock Hall of Fame is because of that album. I think if it had just been Dookie,
then they would have just. That's a good point.
Because think of all the other 90s bands like Soundgarden, Smashing Pumpkins, Alice in Chains. None of them are in the Rock Hall of Fame yet. I think eventually they will.
And
be.
they'll get there, but
And Green Day maybe eventually would have, but if it was just off the strength of Dookie, which I mean, the album's named after poop. Let's be, they were snotty punk kids. I think people like critics would not have taken them as seriously. It's like, oh, these were just some Bay Area punk kids that just faded away.
Yeah.
But
that album was such a huge not just a comeback, but and it made a statement.
It redefined them as a band,
right? Exactly. And even now, when was it just this last New Year's? There was some controversy because there was a song they didn't want that the the network didn't want them to play. They played it and said, "Screw you, we're going to be punk."
Yeah. And it made them punk again. It made them cool again. Boulevard of Broken Dreams from that album was a
they didn't
huge
want them to
hit.
get political.
Don't get political.
Don't get political. And they're like, no, we're going to play.
Yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do what we want, which it just made them seem cooler. And their next album, 21st Century Breakdown, was basically a rehash of American Idiot.
Yeah.
Because we're like, this is what we do now. And they've gone back and forth being political, being, the guys that made an album named after poop. But they've endured, and now they're on tour. And this is such a defining milestone in their career. I think to younger millennials and Gen Z, if they know Green Day, they know them as American Idiot. They know Boulevard of Broken Dreams and Holiday and those songs.
Yeah.
Gen X, it's Dookie. Like that was a defining album. So they have these two really distinct, iconic periods. And now they're touring because Dookie came out in 94, American Idiot in 2004. It's the 30th/20th anniversary tour for both of those albums.
Perfect.
Yeah, like we can just do both albums in their entirety, get the anniversaries out, bring in multiple generations of fans.
I guess that's the only upside of waiting 10 years between your albums.
You can time out the anniversaries. You got to think about that. You don't want to come back too soon. you got to talk about Mariah Carey. This is one of my favorite just because of the backstory of this. There's so much drama.
I think that people now just think that Mariah Carey has always been, from when she came on the scene in the 1990, that she's just always been Mariah Carey.
Right. And the gap was only a few years. And normally most of these, there's a longer period of time. Yeah. But this one was this was one of the few where the failure part was orchestrated by somebody else. Like Mariah Carey's career was definitely sabotaged. And because this is what happens.
Everyone agrees on that.
Yes. So through the 90s, she's the biggest artist in the world, 14 #1 hits in a decade. She's on Columbia Records. Her boss is Tommy Mottola. He's the head of Columbia. Mm-hmm. Also her husband.
That's always, that's a risky.
Yeah, which might be partly why she was so big in the 90s, because obviously he's pushing. Right. Like she's good for business. It's good for his personal life.
Right.
Their marriage falls apart. She's miserable. So she leaves Columbia, divorces Tommy Mottola. So now this is not only his ex-wife, it's his biggest star jumping ship.
Right.
And he was determined to make sure she would fail.
Right, because he doesn't want her to go someplace else, and then suddenly it blows up in it. Now you're not only divorced from her, now she's beating you in business, and you can't have that.
And he did not allow that. And part of, we always talk about the Jennifer Lopez, Mariah Carey beef. The famous thing where somebody asked Mariah about J-Lo, and she goes, I don't know her. J-Lo factors into this. Beyonce factors into this. It's so bizarre. So 2001, Mariah Carey has left Columbia. She's signed with Virgin Records, a huge deal. And the first thing she's going to do is an album and a movie. The movie is Glitter, one of the most notorious flops in film history, which does not help the situation. So that would have flopped anyway. I don't think there's no world where Glitter's going to be a hit. It was not great.
We can't put that one on.
But the first single from the Glitter soundtrack in the summer of 2001 is the song Loverboy. And it was supposed to sample originally a song called Firecracker by the Yellow Magic Orchestra, this Chinese group. Tommy Mottola finds out that she's going to sample that song for her lead single, swipes it, has J-Lo sample the same song for her song I'm Real, and gets it out first to beat Mariah to the punch. So she's about to release the first single from her whole new life.
Right.
Scrambles to change the song. She keeps Loverboy, but swaps the sample out to Candy by Cameo. And so she's like, okay, I got my sample cleared. Screw you, Tommy Mottola and Jennifer Lopez. I'm going to get this song out. So you got to understand a little bit how the charts worked at this time. So early 2001, most labels weren't releasing physical singles anymore, not cassette and CD singles. Yeah. So most songs are charting just off of airplay. When the song comes out, radio's not playing Mariah so much anymore, but she releases a single. And one thing Mariah Carey could always do was sell singles. Loverboy is going to go to #1.
Right.
At that time, at #7 on the charts was Bootylicious by Destiny's Child. And that was purely off of airplay. And they weren't going to release a single because they already got it in the top 10. They want to sell albums, not singles. Destiny's Child is on Columbia.
Oh, boy.
The week Mariah releases the Loverboy single, Tommy rush releases a single for Bootylicious to give it sales points. Bootylicious jumps to the top. Mariah goes to #2 and is blocked by Destiny's Child because he was deliberately keeping her from #1.
Wow.
She has a nervous breakdown. She goes on TRL. People are like, what is wrong with her? All this is just impacting her. And the sad, sad cherry on top of this, do you know what day the Glitter soundtrack came out?
I don't.
Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. So the soundtrack is released on 9/11.
Oh, my God.
The movie's already tanking. It was a recipe for disaster. It was this perfect storm. Virgin, the label she had just signed with, is like, we want nothing to do with this. They gave her $28 million to leave.
Walk away.
Which, great to get that money.
Sure, but now...
But she's more interested in her career.
Right.
She already had money.
By the way, in fairness to them, I don't think that J-Lo or Destiny's Child have any...
J-Lo might have. Look, the stories that J-Lo and Tommy Mottola concocted that together.
They want to be #1. But so you think that J-Lo...
J-Lo's might... There's some rumors that it might have been more deliberate.
Huh.
Because there had always been a little friction.
So they weren't just... She wasn't just a pawn. She was aware of the game.
According to some people. According to some people. She might deny that. I don't know. As far as I know, Destiny's Child had nothing to do with it.
Right.
So Mariah then does another album called Charm Bracelet in 2002. Critics hate it. It did not do very well. The highest charting song got to #81. It was... And it's like, how is this the woman that just 2 years ago was consistently hitting #1? And it was, her personal life was just falling apart. So she plans a comeback. She gets with Jermaine Dupri. They record the album, The Emancipation of Mimi. The first single was a song called It's Like That. Got to number 16, which is not great, but it's a foot back in the door.
It's better than 81.
And then they
Way
planned,
better
she
than
planned on that being not the big hit. This was she deliberately was like, let's save the second song.
Right.
And it was this song.
When you left, I lost a part of me. It's still so hard to believe. Come back, baby, please, 'cause we belong together. Who else am I gonna leave?
We Belong Together would wind up spending 14 weeks at number 1. It would become the biggest hit of the 2000s. She had the longest running number 1 hit of 2 consecutive decades because of that. And honestly, and she had more number 1s after that. Touch My Body, Don't Forget About Us. And I kind of wonder, every Christmas now, All I Want for Christmas Is You, or All I Want for Christmas Is You, it goes to number 1. It's been number 1 for 14 weeks now, total. Probably going to be more by the end of the decade.
Yeah.
So Mariah might actually have the longest running number 1 hit of 3 different decades. But if she had not had that comeback in 2005, I don't know that All I Want for Christmas Is You would be as big as it is every year.
Huh.
I think that just people loved her again
So the
and embraced
feud
that
with
song.
Tommy sort of allowed for. I don't think that she would in any way think that this is a positive, but it at least allowed for that to happen, for that comeback of that album. Because I guess if she's just always making number 1 hits,
You turn against her.
Right.
Well, we're sort of seeing that now with Taylor Swift. There's a backlash because I think
Taylor
people are
Swift,
just tired
Drake.
of her always winning. Drake, people are like, I'm ready for you to fall because
You
there's
need
nothing more you love than putting somebody on a pedestal and then knocking them down. People
Exactly.
love doing that. Mariah got knocked down so spectacularly, so publicly. You felt sorry for her.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted her to come back.
So what we're saying is Drake needs to make a glitter.
Maybe.
What's your glitter gonna be, Drake?
But, so of all these comebacks, there have been like, Santana we saw was like commercially gigantic. Green Day and Elvis reinvented their careers. But to me, the greatest comeback of all time, there is only one. And it's kind of similar to Mariah, where you are so rooting for someone, but even more so.
Right.
Tina Turner, hands down, no competition, the greatest comeback of all time.
Oh yeah.
Because
that
it checks all the boxes. One, just the story of this woman who came from nothing.
that it's not just about the rooting for her isn't just about the music.
Yeah.
It's about her personally. It's about her life and the challenge, the tragedies that she went through.
Abused
she
by
had
her
to deal
husband,
with.
Ike.
But then the music is,
And
it's a nice cherry on top when the music is really.
The music is
really good.
great. And it wasn't just, Tina Turner's having hits. It redefined her career. To the point that other than Proud Mary, which was with Ike, which is such an iconic song, they didn't have a ton of hits. And as successful as they were, her solo career from the 80s on kind of made Ike a footnote in her career. She got so big in that
Because
second run.
That dividing line, everything after that dividing line is so good and so popular and so successful. Yeah, you do kind of forget about everything other than Proud Mary.
But she came back. When she hit number 1 with What's Love Got to Do With It in 1984, she was 44 years old. She was, at the time, the oldest woman ever to have a number 1 hit. It was so unlikely because Ike and Tina had not had a ton of huge hits.
Right.
Proud Mary was their only top 10. And then she just becomes one of the most dominant pop stars of the 80s and early 90s, up through I Don't Want to Fight in 93.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a comeback so great they made a movie about it.
Oh yeah.
And, What's Love Got to Do With It? Which I do want to play something, but not What's Love Got to Do With It?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what you think of as the song that was her comeback.
But no, there was one before.
There was kind of like Mariah. They were like,
remake.
let's get a dip a toe in the water. And I think maybe they chose a remake because Proud Mary was a remake of a Creedence Clearwater Revival song.
Right.
So maybe the label's thinking, we do a remake, remind
again.
people, and it got Tina back on the radio. It made the top 30, which is not huge, but for an artist who had not had a hit in well over a decade, it was good. So this was Tina's version of Al Green's Let's Stay Together. So yeah, she gets back on radio with Let's Stay Together, and then boom, What's Love Got to Do With It is the second single, shoots to number 1, and then you got Private Dancer, Better Be Good to Me, Typical Male, We Don't Need Another Hero, just hit. Simply the Best. It was not just so successful or so great to see this older artist come back and have this hit, but someone that just deserved it.
Yeah, that
I don't
deserved
usually think
and that everyone cheered for, and that's why the movie was such a huge success. That's why her book was such a huge success. That's why the Broadway play is a huge success.
And when she died, it was just such a big deal because it's like we will never see someone like that ever again.
Yeah. Well, and in some ways, you hope you don't because
You hope
you
you
don't
don't.
want someone to go through what she did.
Right.
But man, did she
I think,
succeed.
I mean, beyond just being a
You're
pop
right.
star and successful, like she was an inspiration to people.
Yeah.
That she
And continues to be.
and continues
will
to
always be. I like that one. That's the right way to wrap this up because that's a comeback that there's
That
no
is a-
one who isn't rooting for it.
It's a comeback for the ages.
All right,
really.
but I am gonna take that monkey's respect. That's my takeaway.
Good, good.
I already love Tina.
Yeah.
but Now
Spreading
the
some
monkey-
monkey's gospel.
That is gonna do it for us this week on Get to the Hook, and we will be back next week with more.